this is David Michael Boji. I'm a retired professor from New Mexico State University, although I still got a couple of affiliations with some European universities. I want to explain to you what is this idea of the processes of systems and some different kinds of consciousnesses that I call the four who's. You can find the handout at Antenarrative.com. Ante means a bet. When we go to Las Vegas, we make a bet and we place it on the gaming table. And Ante also means the before or the history. So I started working with it in 2001, and over the 20-some years, I've figured out 7 processes, and this year, 6 more that I want to share with you today. So the initial process is called the beneath, and it's going beneath all the divisiveness that we have. I don't know if you've noticed, but you can't talk to family members anymore about things like masks and vaccinations and, well, global warming, for examples. And so I want to overcome the debate mode that polarizes members of my family, members of your family, members of an organization. And that's why I have a crack in the beneath heart, because I really want to heal those relationships using true storytelling. And true storytelling begins with what's true. And I want to go beneath that idea that what's true is a concept or fact-checking or a right-wrong opinion. And I want to get into what's called being. So you notice this heart points towards being. And I'm an existentialist. I want to focus on existence and dealing with some of the existential crises of our time. Maybe you could list a few of them, like global warming, the fact that we seem to be in endless wars, one after another, the growing poverty around the world. Many good things are happening, and I call those bets on the future. And there's many good things that happened before in the histories. But what I'm trying to do is pull 4 hearts together, the beneath heart going beneath the disagreements, looking at the before, my history, your history, all the histories of a nation and the history of the world. And I want to look at bets on the future, placing bets or aunties. You say auntie up, but each auntie is a way of sort of foretelling the future. You're betting on the future, but you're also making a future happen in being. So I start working with these 7 processes, and I'll go through them very briefly, but I want to center on the 4 hearts. So 2 of the hearts, the before and the bets, are about time. So the before goes into history, bets goes into the future. 2 hearts are about space, kind of the space of an opinion, right? The space of a concept. Those are very abstract notions, very abstract ideas. But I want to ground in being, and I even want to go beyond into how we have dialogues with people that are different from us. And I'll get into that more specifically in a moment. So if you crisscross the time dimension and the space dimension, that gives us the coordinates for the 7 storytelling processes with the notion of being in the middle. You might notice that it's a nautilus. The nautilus swims in the ocean, and it's also a spiral. That's why it's drawn with a spiral. A nautilus moves by filling its inner chambers and its intermediate chambers with air. And and floating up, bringing in more water, less air, and going down. And it can also move laterally. It's based on the Fibonacci spiral, just to give you a little bit of math in that being. So Fibonacci said, okay, you take 1 plus 1, you get 2, right? Now, if I combine the two previous numbers, 1 and 2, I get 3. Combine those two previous numbers, 2 and 3, I get 5. The two previous numbers, 3 and 5, I get 8. I continue, 5 and 8, I get 13. 8 and 13, I get 21. 13 and 21, I get 34. So that's called a spiral series, a Fibonacci series, and it's kind of the golden mean of what you see in snail shells and nautilus, in pine cones, if you look down on them. So I'm a big fan of spirals, you have to excuse me. So let's talk about the 4 whos. If you start to look at these 7 processes, you notice that number 6 is the between. So if we go between the hearts and we get to the heart of the matter of what's true, well, we find that there's different consciousnesses. Now, when I was in the military and boot camp, I had a particular consciousness, like, I want to go home. But they were training me in some fundamental disciplines. And one of the things they trained me was to have self-confidence. So I developed an ego, not out of sorts ego, but an ego where I learned to shoot an M16, M14 as a sharpshooter. I learned to march. I learned to run up sand hills in Fort Jackson, South Carolina, with my buddies that were in the same barracks as me. Now that's a kind of a we consciousness, because we all dressed alike, we wore the same fatigues, we slept in the same kind of bunks, we were in the same barracks, we fell out together for formation, we ran up those sand hills. So we developed a camaraderie that I never knew before. I certainly didn't know that in high school or kicking it with my friends. So this ego consciousness, who is David Boji? What is myself? What's my authentic self? Starts to interact with a we consciousness, and I'm part of a military unit. Then in the upper right, a military is a very corporate kind of environment. There's a hierarchy, there's a chain of command, there's division of labor, and that kind of a who consciousness is very different. And the two have to work together, being a we in a unit and being able to take commands and work within a structure like a pyramid that's very military. And the new military has worked that out, where people are deployed overseas and now they work on being a family while they're overseas. There's no substitute for your family at home for that we-centric consciousness, but it helps. It helped more than I got when I was in Vietnam. Now there's a 4th consciousness called the Eco-centric-consciousness. Eco is ecology. So as I've grown older and interacted more and got in touch with some lessons from my dad, that taught me, he taught me, pack out what you pack in when you're camping or when you're hiking in the desert or the woods. And I noticed today's society, where I live here in New Mexico, a lot of people pack out, but a few people don't. And boy, does the trash and the illegal dumping accumulate, and it just stays there forever in the desert. And same thing in oceans. So I'm interested in how to help a corporate consciousness or a military consciousness, those command and control structures, They're so focused on whatever their bottom line is, and help them understand an ecological consciousness. And you do that through dialogue. So bringing people into dialogue with a corporate-centric consciousness, and maybe a we-centric consciousness, so an ecological consciousness can develop. And that's what we do in the true storytelling groups, true storytelling circles. We have those conversations, but we have them with real people. We're not just imagining what an ecological consciousness is. We are interacting with it. Now, I have an ecological consciousness thanks to my dad. After his third divorce, he went to be a hermit in Oregon along the Snake River, and for about 6 years was by himself. And he learned that, the trees have a consciousness, the vegetation, the water has a consciousness. For him, everything became something that had consciousness. So for a we-centric person growing up without a lot of contact with nature, that can be a little bit odd, because we're taught in school that humans have the only true consciousness, and trees and water and spadefoot toads and all kinds of other things don't have a consciousness. Well, I believe that they do have a consciousness. I think it's maybe not as sentient as a human consciousness, but those whales, maybe they have more consciousness than humans, and maybe they're smarter about being in their environment than humans are. So we could learn from that. And that's what I want to do, bring my ego consciousness in contact with the who consciousness, but not where I lose myself, not where I become a slave to the who. What it's called the they self. If the they takes me over and I lose my own self-identity, that's not cool. And I felt like that growing up, that I was losing my sense of self and being asked to conform with all kinds of we-centric or corporate-centric when I started working corporations and military and universities. And now I want to bring the four consciousness, the four who's, I want to bring them together in the eventness of being in that space and time. So those are some introductions to the four consciousnesses. And what I need your help in doing, if you notice, I've started to crisscross the four consciousnesses. And where I started out was 7 antenarrative processes, the 7 B's, the beneath, the before, the bets, right? The being, the 2 kinds of becoming, the between and the beyond. Now I'm interested in what are those other 6? If you start interrelating the who consciousnesses, for example, if I start to interrelate a we consciousness with an ecological consciousness, number 10 there on the bottom, well, that's called social ecology. And what I want to challenge you with is, can you name the others? Can you name number 8 and 9 and 11 and 12 and 13? What are those disciplines of consciousness that if we bring people from each consciousness together, or maybe you have both consciousness in you, bring that together in dialogue, what kinds of new systems can we create? And can we address the ecological crises of our time, the existential crises, I'll call them, of not being able to talk to one another, of being divided, being in silos. I grew up watching a lot of TV, and the screen is over here and I'm watching the screen, and okay, I can snap my remote control, turn off the screen, change the channel, but I'm in my ego-centric consciousness. I'm not really interacting with the TV. you know. But you all grew up with cell phones and internet and all of these new technologies where you're all very social, we-centric people, I would imagine. And so balancing who you are in your authentic self, your egocentric self, without becoming totally egotistical, obviously, but being able to be in the social is the we. But now you're going to go into corporate settings, and maybe you don't want the command and control hierarchy. My dog is barking at me, telling me I got 4 minutes left with you. But my dogs have really cool consciousnesses. I got 2 of them. One is very timid, and we got her from a shelter, and she was obviously abused because if you pick up any house, she goes and hides. And if she hears gunshots, she hides. And I have another dog we got from the shelter, and he's fearless. You can walk up where they're hunting and he don't care. He just wants to smell the bushes and smell the other dog poops, and he's happy. The 2 of them get along really well, but I have to be gentle with one and I have to be firm with the other because I'm responsible for caring for them both. So they each have their own consciousnesses. So I don't believe this idea that animals don't have a consciousness. I believe plants have a consciousness. You can go to a tree, for example, and play a tape of insects chomping away on tree leaves, and that tree is going to exude some different kinds of chemicals. They communicate by chemicals, by mycelium networks. Their internet is the mycelium network in the soil. So that's the kind of ecological consciousness that I want to bring to you in understanding. And I think that's kind of a short introduction to the who's, the 4 who's, the 4 hearts. The 4 hearts are really important because each of them is a different way of looking at what's true in the world. In the beneath heart, we say, hey, what's true is my opinion, my facts, my concepts. In the before heart, you say, oh, what's true is my life experience, my history. But there's also the life history of the nation. And didn't they tell us that Columbus discovered America? And we know that's not true. So we start to sort out true histories, our own history, understanding of the other histories we're a part of. Then we have the bets heart. We make a bet on the future. And if you fulfill it, that bet can cancel out something in being. To bring something into existence, I'm old enough where I used to get all my videos by going to Blockbuster. But when Netflix came along, guess what? Blockbuster went away. And Blockbuster could have stayed if they would have adapted to how to stream videos, but they chose not to. So make a bet, you change the nature of being when you fulfill that bet, when your intention goes into being. In the beyond, I look at what's intuitive, I look at the 6th sense, other senses than the 5 senses. So I spent a lot of time in meditation, and I didn't do that when I was your age. I wish I had, because it attunes me to nature. So those 4 hearts are important, but the nautilus shell in the center, what is the essence of being? What is the essence of truth? And that's the uncovering of the truth. And that's what I've been talking to you about today. So I'm going to leave it there and invite you to contact me if you have any questions. Go to antenarrative.com and you can find out more about what I said. So thank you very much. and I hope you've enjoyed it.